Barbara Lapointe, your host for today's conversation with author Tim Coates. Now, if you're joining us for the very first time and you don't know who Tim Coates is a successful business executive who's now an author who's written 2 books. His first book, Towards a Life Well Lived, Reflections on the Art of Increasing Joy, Meaning and Belonging in Daily Living, is available on Amazon. And his next book is debuting in April 2026, and it's called The Secret Within, Finding Peace in Hard Times. Hi, Tim.
Hey, Barbara, good to see you.
Yeah, it's wonderful to be here with you today.
It is, it's great, and I'm excited talking. I'm excited that the book is coming out. I'm excited that it's finally done, and it's great to get an opportunity to chat about it.
Well, congratulations to you. I was thinking before we began that what if the answers we're searching for in life, all of you out there, are actually already within us? So I'm delighted to be in this author conversation with you. Congratulations. And I'd like to begin with a little bit of context about why you wrote this book that's debuting so soon. Why it's an important book. So maybe begin by giving us a little bit of context on your new book that you've worked so very hard to make.
Thanks, Barbara. Well, the book came out of really considerable personal pain, and it's 40 years of experience of living a life that I really never dreamed of. What had happened was that from a very early age on, I was a highly motivated, disciplined, driven little kid and individual, and everything was going along great. My new wife and I had moved to Minneapolis and had fantastic jobs, and even back in those days, were able to buy a home after only 2 years of marriage. And we were sitting in the car one evening by one of the beautiful Minneapolis lakes. If you don't know, Minnesota is the land of 10,000 lakes, of which we have probably 12 in the cities. And so it was a warm summer evening, and we were sitting in the car and almost pinching ourselves at how fortunate our life was progressing. And then a few months later, after we had decided to start a family, our first child was born. And our first child turned out to be born with a very severe physical disability. And this is something that neither of us had obviously anticipated. And, prior to this point, I was used to controlling my life. I was used to being in control. I was used to setting goals. I was used to making plans. And I was 27 at the time. And I was pretty confident of myself in my ability to steer the course of my life's events. And suddenly, in just the blink of an eye, our life took a different course. And our son has had lifelong medical problems. He spent the first 6 weeks of his life in the intensive care unit when he was born on Easter morning. And in the next 40 years of his life, he's had, 100 surgeries, many of them life-threatening. And throughout that period of time, I was left with thinking about, well, how does one live joyfully? How does one, carry on when things didn't turn out the way you might have expected them to turn out? So really the book comes out of that experience and me kind of learning on my own as I stumbled along the way around how to live beyond the circumstances that you're confronted with.
Yes, well, you have a very powerful story. I'm so grateful that you're sharing it with the world. And when people buy this book, they're going to have it in their hands. But really, it's been 40 years of your life in the making. And so today, what we're going to do, now that you've provided that context, is dive a little bit deeper into that and talk about awakening to awareness. And then it's going to be a 3-part video series, and that we'll invite you to, just so you understand. In the second video, Tim, you're going to share some of the tools that are actually in your new book, correct?
Exactly.
Okay, so you've given a really good context because what happened to you was completely out of your control. Like you didn't see that coming, and this just happened. It happened out of your control, and your entire life shifted.
Right. And, I grew up with the belief that, as I mentioned earlier, that, one controls their own destiny. And really the second thing is that, you know, attitude determines altitude. So when we came across this bump in the road, my initial thoughts were, well, I mean, that's it is what it is, and we'll move forward from here. And I was in a very stressful executive job, even in those days. And I just tried to bifurcate or divide into two, my work life, my personal life. And in my personal life, I really delved pretty deeply into philosophy, to see what wisdom teachers who had faced similar problems or different problems, how they had approached their life. And my intent was to create a recipe for my life using the wisdom of others to figure out how I could continue, and rather than just being happy and appearing to be happy on the outside, to truly be joyful on the inside. And through that period of time, I don't know, I filled a couple bookcases full of philosophical works and from, philosophers, theologians, mystics of the era. And what I came to find out, and I'm condensing 20 years into 2 minutes, is that the road to peace by way of intellect was impassable. And I wasn't able to develop that recipe. Sure, some of the readings gave me a reprise and gave me something to think about and aspire to, but still inside, I was very, very troubled about the situation that our son faced and the situation that our family faced. And it was at that point in the journey that I had read and studied quite a bit about Eastern philosophy. And one of the big things in Eastern philosophy is the mindfulness practice. And I thought, well, maybe that's what I need. And so I started to engage, not even knowing what I was doing really, to engage in mindfulness and contemplative practices to see if that might not be an avenue towards peace. And what I discovered, and this is really the first section of the book where I talk about awakening to awareness, is awareness is something that we just take for granted. I mean, we're aware, right? I mean, what else is there to know? But what I found was that really it's more complicated than that. And myself, and maybe you too, there's always a voice talking in my head. It's telling me what I should do or shouldn't do, or what I should say or shouldn't have said, or how I should have acted in a certain situation but didn't. And I know on my way home from work, a lot of days, movies would run in my mind about how the day went and things that irritated me or things that I thought I, did well. And there's this constant narrative that the self creates. And what I learned through mindfulness and through the contemplative practices that I engaged in was that you need to be aware to think, but not necessarily think to be aware. And that was a brand new learning for me. And as I learned to let go of thought and to find an inner peace that wasn't troubled by this, this monkey-minded self that was inside me doing all the talking, that peace began to emerge. And as I explored that further, I found that this peace not only could emerge during the practice, but it could continue after the practice. And so the whole first, movement, as we call it, of the book is explaining that awakening and of quieting the mind and becoming more present to life so that, the grand expanse of life becomes, offered to us rather than that narrow slice that comes through the aperture of self.
Because this was a process for you. I mean, you had this massive shift, and just to paint the picture a little bit more, I think what I understood is you were going back to work and your peace was becoming disrupted with these thoughts, with the daily problems that show up, and with this new reality you were facing. So you had to go through this process of building a awareness and a mindfulness practice.
Yeah, it was difficult at first because I don't know if any of our listeners have ever tried to stop thinking.
Yeah.
And, thought is like a recalcitrant child. I mean, the more you try to stop thinking, it's like telling a 3-year-old, just calm down. No, I said, just calm down. Well, that is not a very successful strategy with a 3-year-old. And our mind many times behaves like a 3-year-old. And so it took quite a long period of time for me to learn to let go of thoughts. I think the whole mindfulness process was the first skill, quote unquote, I've ever learned where it was learned through subtraction rather than addition. Let me explain that for a moment. If
Sure.
one wants to learn a musical instrument, well, you need to either take lessons or sit in front of the piano or pick up the guitar and work out chords and work out melodies, and you practice and practice and practice until you can play a song for someone. Well, mindfulness doesn't really work that way. I mean, because the more you try to practice letting go of thoughts, the more thoughts will, ingrain themselves in your consciousness. And so I like to describe it as driving a car, wanting to stop, and then suddenly realizing you don't have any brakes. So what does one do? Well, take your foot off the gas. And if we take our foot off the gas, eventually the car will roll to a stop. And that's what I found as I began to work on these mindfulness practices. And as I became more familiar with what it was like to sit in stillness, it became more apparent that there's more than one type of awareness. There's an awareness that self produces, with all the thoughts that are running through our brain. And there's an awareness that presence produces when we just simply sit and be. And that awareness that presence presents is very, very powerful in helping us to accept situations we can't control.
Yes. I mean, one of the things that struck me was that when this first happened to you at the beginning, and then through your process of years, you're developing a mindfulness practice. There were times where you were going to work, because it's clear to me that your values were you're intelligent, you're successful, you hard work, you're a hard worker, and but yet all the work that you could do in the world couldn't resolve the problems that your son faced in terms of his health.
That was very, very difficult because, my model up to then had been, if you work hard, you can accomplish absolutely anything you want. And I am a person who is wired to be happy. I mean, when I first wake up in the morning, no matter what is going on, even right after the birth of our child, when he was still in intensive care, I'd wake up and for the first 15 seconds, I was happy. I was energized. Let's go out and get the world. And then all of a sudden, the world came crashing back down. And until someone has experienced something like, the death of a loved one or a very traumatic situation in their life, it's hard to imagine what it's like to be completely helpless. And so here I was, a quote unquote successful executive that who for the first time in their life was completely helpless. And I didn't know where to turn. I didn't know how to get it back to good in the vernacular. And so that's where the mindfulness was very, very helpful because, you know, whether it's your phone or your computer, you always get these announcements that says, there's a new software update that will occur automatically overnight. And you plug your phone in or you plug your computer in and the new software comes downloaded and pretty soon you're protected from viruses and your machine works better. Well, what is that when it comes to life, when it comes to a virus or a disruption that we get that we weren't expecting? And what I found was that this awareness of presence was a new way to boot up into life, to use a computer term. And that when I entertained life from this type of awareness, I found that circumstances had less power over me because the present happens, as we know, now and now and now. And what causes us to suffer really the most with whatever situation we're dealing with is thinking about it. For some reason, we just can't resist touching our wounds. And if we can learn to again, boot up into presence, well, then those wounds are irrelevant because there's something that happened yesterday or 2 months ago or 10 years ago. And if we can just be present now, we can gain that moment of peace that gives us the strength and the resilience to continue.
Really interesting conversation we're having. I'm enjoying it. And a lot of good information you're imparting that people need, because we can move through life, but I don't think we can move through life without at some point along our timeline experiencing a trauma. And that struck me because the very definition of trauma is that state of helplessness. It
Right.
actually doesn't matter what happened to us. We all have it could be a big T trauma or a little T trauma, but that state of helplessness. So it sounds to me like you moved through that by developing these practices that you're going to be sharing with us. And so let's move now into your process of awakening to awareness.
Yes. And so I think maybe the way I could summarize that is that the biggest learning really for me in my life, and it's too bad it took me so long to learn it. Hopefully the book will accelerate that process for others. Was to learn to be still. I think there was an Eagles song, way back when Don Henley sang a song called "Learn to Be Still," and it's actually an amazing thing because if we can just slow down those thoughts and escape our monkey minds, then we find that life is beautiful. And I think part of the awakening to awareness is awakening to an aperture or an opening for life that's so much broader than ourself. We may be experiencing a lot of pain inside, but we might be standing in front of a beautiful sunset. We might be experiencing that pain and standing in front of a grandchild or a child or a friend and looking into their eyes. And we miss this beauty when we boot up into self. But let's face it, all of us, and I don't mean this in any way negative, we're all egotistical. We're all self-centered because we want our lives to turn out the way we want our lives to turn out. And
That's true.
it's so true. And the awakening to awareness to realizing is there's nothing wrong with wanting your life to turn out the way you want it to turn out. There's nothing wrong with striving to achieve things. But sometimes, especially those times when we don't have complete control, it's equally helpful to be able to widen that opening beyond self to the rest of the world. And one of the practices we'll talk about in the second video is how to shift one's awareness from self to something that's beautiful. One of the things my daughter does with our granddaughter is when our granddaughter gets upset about something, I notice that she never tells her to, well, don't be upset or to sit over here quietly. And she never reprimands her. Instead, she presents her with a very skillfully constructed choice. Would you like to read this favorite book together? Or do you want to take that toy away from your sister? Well, with a skillfully selected choice, my granddaughter usually says, well, let's read the book together, Mom. And all of a sudden she drops her frustration of screaming at her sister. And really, that's what we're going to be talking about in the second video. Is we're going to talk about the adult version of let's stop grabbing the toy and let's start shifting our attention to something beautiful that can occupy our consciousness.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the second video because it sounds so simple, but yet I think it's uncomfortable. Like it's uncomfortable when you start to do this, and so how do you do this? It sounds like, okay, how do you start moving into that place? And the thought of you demonstrating a little bit about how we can start embodying that or moving into that is going to be really helpful. And we hear about these type of topics in the world, in popular language, in popular culture. And I was just curious, what is the difference between consciousness and awareness from your perspective? Or
Ooh,
are they
I
comfortable?
Yeah, I love that question. That's one of my favorite questions. It's one that I've thought about so much. So let's unpack that a little bit here. First of all, we're all conscious, right? But just because I'm conscious doesn't mean I'm aware. Sometimes, and I'm sure this never happens to anyone else, my wife will ask me to do something. I don't hear what she's saying. I'm conscious, but I wasn't aware she was speaking to me. And we all know with a partner, a family member, whoever, how that works out when you're not aware of their presence, but even though you may be conscious of it. And so let's look at how that works in the normal mode of awareness. The normal mode is that, okay, first we're conscious, and then consciousness enables thought. And then once we start thinking about something, we develop a context. And once we start develop that context, we develop a perspective. So let me give you an example. Let's say someone who is politically liberal, they'll hear a news item, they'll filter that through their context, through their perspective, and the reality they'll take away from that news item will be entirely different from someone who maybe is on the other side of the political spectrum, who hears it from a different context and different perspective. And in our normal everyday life, our context and perspective is self. And let's face it, we all have our likes and dislikes and our hopes and our fears and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. What the awakening to awareness part is about is let's go from consciousness to an awareness that is not filtered through thought. And you think, well, that's impossible. Well, we could sit right here, right now, and take 3 long, deep breaths. Breathe in, release that breath. And you've heard this before. I mean, it's been talked about a lot. Mm-hmm. And for some reason, and it's hard to explain why, if one really does that and fills their lungs completely and lets that breath out and lets the stress out with it, we feel just a little bit better. And that's maybe a small example of booting up into the new type of awareness I'm talking about. And all it is an awareness that hasn't been tainted by our thoughts, our context, and our perspective.
Well, this is good stuff, because I think these are universal themes and universal access points that people are hungry for. And so we're going to get into that even deeper. You're going to share with us how we can do it and actually give us the tools that couple so nice with the book that you've written, The Secret Within. And to have the video and the book together is really exciting. So let's move on to the second video now. But before we do, follow us over there, like and subscribe, share your comments. Tim's always going to be there. We're going to respond to your comments. But Tim, what's important about these practices? Like, how can our life change for the better? Like, what's important about it, so that we can get over to video 2 and get deeper into the practice?
Well, I think, what's important about it is we're bringing balance to our life. I mean, there's a lot of energy that exists within us. And if we hold that energy in, as thought tends to do, sometimes that energy can build up so much stress that it's like a tea kettle just getting ready to explode. And what's important about the practices is that we're taking purposeful time each day. And maybe it's only 10 minutes, or maybe we're lucky and we can get up earlier in the morning, we can find 20 minutes. We're taking some time to let some of the steam vent from that tea kettle and to recalibrate our existence from a place with better balance and better peace.
Such a beautiful invitation in today's world where there's so much pulling on us all the time for our attention, for our energy, and to take those 10 or 20 minutes. I'm excited. In the second video, you're going to talk about what you call silent fitness?
Correct. Silent fitness was, I think it's a personally invented term, but what's important about it is that as I experimented with different ways to change the firmware of my awareness, I found ways that didn't work or weren't helpful for me. That doesn't mean they wouldn't be helpful for others, but they weren't helpful for me. And I found other techniques that helped me a lot. And so what I share in the book are the techniques that helped me and hopefully will help others as well.
Very exciting. All right. Step one is buy the book. I encourage everyone to go to Amazon, buy Tim's new book, The Secret Within, and also check out his website. Where can folks find you before they head over to video number 2, Tim?
Well, the cool thing now, and I don't know if this will work for everybody, but it's working for me. If you just Google my name, Tim, Coats, not ES, but Coats, it's the first thing that comes. It's the first thing for me that comes up on Google.
Excellent.
If that doesn't work for you, my website is very, very easy. It's tim-coats.com. So either way, one of those two ways will work for sure.
Excellent. And we'll also be putting show notes down on certain platforms that you can access. So I encourage you to buy the book. But most of all, I encourage you to join us in video number 2, where we start flexing our muscles and learning more about this silent fitness that author Tim Coates is going to share with us. Tim, thank you for being here. It's been wonderful to just share this time with you in this conversation. And I'm inspired by your book. Thank you for writing it.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm looking forward to our next video.
Yeah.